All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Public Health's virtual education series, Wažookį, Family Conversations. I'm Jamie Decora, the Community Health Representative Supervisor, and joining me today is Renelle, our public health nurse, who will moderate today's session. The goal of this series is to gather, learn, and share about Ho-Chunk culture, resources, services, and the connection to health. In public health, we focus on prevention, promotion, and the protection of the health and well-being of our communities. Health and well-being are rooted in many aspects of our lives, from our physical body, our mental health, our spirit, the environment we live in, and much more. During these sessions, we will explore topics that can impact our health and our well-being. Together, we will learn about tools and resources to improve our health and the health of our communities. Today, we are happy to have Hinu Smith, the Executive Director of the Ho-Chunk Nation Department of Agriculture, here with us today. We will have about 45 minutes for the presentation, followed by a Q&A. Please use the chat function to enter in any comments or questions for our presenter, and Renelle and I will monitor out the chat throughout the presentation and read the questions for our presenter at the end. You can also raise your hand and come off mute during the Q&A to ask questions out loud. Any questions that we do not have time for today, we will bring back to our presenter and email to the group. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Department of Health website and our Facebook page. Everyone, please welcome Hinu.
Thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Can you see just my presentation? I hope.
Yes, you're all good.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm Hinu Smith, Ho-Chunk Nation Executive Director for the Department of Agriculture. We are a new department, more or less. In other words, we've been officially declared and funded as a department for a year and a half now. But we did have a division of agriculture in the Department of DNR for, a good number of years. And then even prior to that, even when we didn't have an ag division or department, we still had agricultural activity happening through the Department of Natural Resources. So today, I just want to thank everybody for being here and inviting me to be part of this. This is really fun. I love being able to talk about the Ho-Chunk Nation and our history and what we're doing. I like to offer a little bit of past history specific to the Ho-Chunk Nation people and the Native nations in this country. I think it offers context. So what I'm going to present, I want people to just be able to listen to it with an open mind, and it's not meant to depict any group of people in a bad way. But I will talk about things that are frustrating, maybe depressing, and might elicit some emotions. But I just want to go through these to offer context on how we got to be where we are at today. So I like to start talking about what it was like pre-contact. So pre-Western contact, our tribe and Indian tribes were very self-sufficient. We had to be. Our people here in Wisconsin, we were here since the beginning of time is what we say. That's what our origin stories tell us. And so unlike other tribes that maybe their origins placed them elsewhere, and then they might have migrated with the seasons or due to other things that were happening, they moved. But for us, we were always here. And so with that, we're very familiar with the landscape and the food and everything that was happening and growing in this area. So our people planted food. We actually planted agriculture. We were agriculturalists. We foraged, we hunted, we trapped, we tapped trees, not just maple trees, but other trees as well, and harvested wild rice. Our tribe maybe today isn't necessarily renowned for wild ricing, but it's my opinion that that is simply because when our people were being moved and shrunk onto smaller and smaller pieces of property, that the properties, the land that did have the wild rice was then annexed from our people. There is still wild rice growing in this area, but it's not necessarily being harvested, and it's not on Ho-Chunk land. So hopefully there will be some movement in the future to sort of revive that in this area, but I don't know. Also, our people, you know, grew and harvested corns, beans, squash, muskrat, beavers, rabbits, fish, birds, and bison, amongst many others. So we were very intentional in our foraging and very intentional in our planting. We were able to preserve food to last over the winter, or to last, you know, get us through those times of famine, you know, feast or famine. We were able to get through droughts, relocation efforts, things like that, because of our ability to preserve food. We also used plants to create fibers. We used animals to create shelter and clothing. So whenever you hear our department talking about agriculture, it really is all encompassing. It's not just talking about planting Indian corn. It's not just talking about food. It's talking about using the environment to be able to do any number of things, and using our plants and animals to serve more than just as a food source. During this time, our people did follow the seasons. We weren't nomadic by any means, but we did move with the seasons. Some families or communities followed maybe hunting or followed other activities, and each group or community kind of had their specialty. And so we had a number of communities all over our territory, which was beyond just Wisconsin. Our territory extended down into Illinois, all the way down to St. Louis, Minnesota, and some of our stories will actually place our people in North and South Dakota as well. And our stories will tell us that many other tribes actually are offshoots of us as the mother tribe. Some of them may say we came from them, but we know they came from us. But prior to contact, our people had many communities all over our territory, and we followed the seasons, and we used various types of transportation. Of course, by foot, using dogs as transportation, helpers, and creating canoes, various types of canoes. We also had very extensive gardens and raised beds. Some of our gardens, there were stories that if you take an arrow and you shoot it, you know, it was so many shots of the arrow, long and wide. Other accounts would say a garden could be 2 miles wide and 6 or 8 miles long. I mean, these are huge, and it's interesting to imagine that, because what we see when we look around our environment today, we see these conventional farms and, you know, acres and acres and miles of corn, conventional corn. But our gardens back then would have looked different. We didn't have to clear cut miles and miles of woods to have this. I mean, we worked with the environment. So it would have been really interesting to be able to see visuals of what those gardens would have looked like. We also utilized raised beds, and we actually planted in directions and created our raised beds in directions that would allow for more warming, earlier season and later season growing within these areas. And it wasn't always just east to west. Certainly the east to west, with the sun going east to west, had its benefits, but there were times when these gardens were actually in other directions as well, or took into account sloping. We were incredible agriculturalists pre-contact. We were selectively breeding our plants to be able to accommodate any number of situations and environments. We had Ho-Chunk corn that could grow in sand, which can be really a tough situation to grow in because there's so much drainage and sand doesn't hold a lot of, say, nutrient or moisture. We had corn that could grow at the other end of the spectrum, right, in clay, which holds a lot of moisture, doesn't have good drainage, and can be really difficult to grow in. And then, of course, everything in between, so the good soils in between. We were able to grow, we were able to selectively breed our plants to be able to accommodate any of these growing situations. Our corn and our foods were also bred to be able to accommodate length, season length. So if we were way up north, say like in the Ashland area, we might have a shorter growing season than we do down here. And we had corn, and I say corn particularly because that's a culturally significant food that we use a lot in ceremony, but that doesn't discount any of the other foods as being less culturally significant or anything like that, but it's just one that we tend to use a lot. And then we also utilize traditional land management practices, and one of those that is commonly talked about would be fire as a way to manage the ground, and not just say utilizing burning of prairie, but also utilizing fire in the gardens. So using it, if you were to build up your rows, build up your rows by a couple of inches and then plant into those raised rows. At the end of the year, if you have soil that is poor quality soil, how can you amend that? Well, you can take that residue or the leftover dried remains of the corn and plants and actually burn those, and then they can actually go down into the little valleys because you've created these raised rows by a couple of inches. Now you can take that burned stuff and put that down into the valleys and then move that soil over. And then next year you've got your rows for next year and you've amended that soil with fire, and that fire has put nutrient into that soil. So we knew how to do a lot of different things. And then post-contact, things happened. And I'm not saying everybody was a bad person and every interaction was a bad interaction and that we didn't have relationships and friendships. We did. But I just want to talk about this in terms of how this time period impacted our food. So when I talk about post-contact, post 1492, so in Wisconsin, that was more like in the 1600s. But our food systems were attacked, and not just Wisconsin, not just Wisconsin tribes, not just Ho-Chunk Nation, but our tribes in general. Our food systems were attacked. And we would call this the extermination era, right? When people would come into our communities and pillage. They would attack our people. They would attack our foods specifically, because that was a way to exterminate the Indian problem. These were warfare tactics. They were very intentionally targeted at killing the food sources, burning the food sources, or stealing the food sources. And by these types of behaviors, that would put our people into a famine mode. If we were attacked in the fall, and our food stores were burned, or stolen, how are we supposed to get through the wintertime? So these were very intentional warfare tactics that were taken upon our people. Our food systems were also used to control or assimilate our people. So the extermination era, with acts of genocide, and genocide encompasses many behaviors. But when we lived, we were still here, we persevered, then the tactics shifted to, okay, let's try to control these people. Let's try to assimilate them into mainstream culture. And so these were the removal eras and the reservation era. Our people were removed from this area many, many times, 8, 9 times. Some of our traditional historians, elders might say, 10 and 12 times or more. through areas of Minnesota, Iowa, one of the Dakotas, and then Nebraska. Our people always came back. In fact, some of the stories would say our people came back on foot, and they actually would arrive back here before the soldiers on horseback. That's how resilient we were. But during these times, we went through famine, we went through hardship, and we had to somehow figure out how we're going to feed our people. And so we would take our seeds with us. We might, tuck them into the seams of our clothing or swallow them so that we would have those. They couldn't be stolen from us. We were very resilient, so we knew how to harvest food along the way, and maybe even found new foods that could be foraged and utilized during that time. Our food was very intentionally utilized to assimilate the people. And so when you're removing people, part of the way you can remove them or encourage them to go along with the removal is to decimate the food and the land, with promises of better food and better land at the new location, or assimilate the people. So you can utilize food to help them assimilate into this mainstream notion of farming. So I'm going to use the farming in a Western sense of remaining on the land year round and farming the land. So this concept of ownership, this concept of farming in the Western style of farming was utilized to assimilate our people. And that was the allotment era, right? Where you are taking lands and then you're giving them not to a tribe, a group of people as a whole, but you're breaking up the land into allotments and then giving them to individual families and telling them that they can only farm on this land and they have to do it in a Western sense, right? So that's not the way our people operated. We hunted vast acres and miles and areas for our food. We moved with the food, we moved with the seasons. And now we're told that you have to stay in this area and farm in this specific way, which means you're going to be farming different types of food or maybe some familiar foods in a different type of a way. And so these tactics were very specific with utilizing food to assimilate our people to Western practices, Western farming practices, in order to have us assimilate into Western society, and using food as that vehicle. That food also, if you move forward, turned into the commodity. So before, I guess between this time and the commodity food distribution program, you have the government rations. Our government removed our people to these reservations and then, with promises of food, right? And so what was that? There were government rations. Oftentimes they were rancid or non-existent. And so that's where maybe food would be delivered and it was rotten. Maybe the meat was rotten. And what were we to do with that? Well, some of that we were pretty resilient, and that's where we actually learned how to, we invented fry bread. So that wasn't a traditional food. That was something that our people created out of these government rations. I hear something in the background. So we were very resilient. We were able to figure out with our resources how to make do and keep our people alive and well. And with that, then we moved into the food distribution era, I guess I'm just saying era, where then our foods were coming from the food distribution. And that type of food at that time was very processed, high in fat, sometimes low in nutrient value. And it was something that many families relied on for a long time. We get more up into today, and the food distribution program is different and taking a different approach. But anyway, so back into this post-contact era, then we have the self-determination era. where tribes were, they couldn't eradicate the tribes. They couldn't necessarily assimilate the tribes all the way. So then they learned, the government, made laws where the tribes were able to formulate and become federally recognized, and then take more action in their own lives and future as a people. Part of that, prior to the self-determination era, part of the attacks on our food system were very intentional. This is a pile of buffalo head. Millions and millions of buffalo were killed to kill the Indian, to address the tribal people here, because it was believed that if you still have buffalo, and many of these tribes were reliant on buffalo for food, clothing, and shelter, as long as there's buffalo, you're going to have native people. So in order to get rid of the native people, you need to get rid of the buffalo. You need to get rid of their main source of everything, and that's extermination, not only of the people, but extermination of the buffalo. And so during the late 1800s, they say the buffalo, because the government would pay you to slaughter these animals. And they say the population of buffalo got down to 500. Some will say even less than that. And there's been a huge effort to revive their populations, but this is a very infamous photo that isn't just depicting the extinction efforts of the buffalo, but really the extermination efforts of tribal people. So this is just kind of an image that just, for me, evokes a lot of emotion and just imagination of, my God, what our people had to go through and endure. And this photo just sort of encompasses all of that. But nonetheless, we persevered, and our people are still here today, stronger than ever. We are reasserting control over our people, our lives. We've formulated a government. We are federally recognized, and we are doing a lot of things in the communities. We are creating codes, laws, ordinances, policies. We are reacquiring land. We are working with food sovereignty efforts and food security efforts. We are reaffirming our traditional practices, and that might mean, in ceremonies with hunting, fishing, trapping, gathering, and tree tapping practices. Maybe we're utilizing modern practices. Maybe we're utilizing traditional practices, or a blend of those with these activities. We're revitalizing our traditional foods, and we're focusing on health, wellness, and holistic approaches to our existence. We still have our ceremonies. We still have a lot of things that we're practicing within our communities. We're working hard to reframe approaches utilizing the Indigenous lens. So maybe we're utilizing, modern practices of agriculture, but we're also making sure to apply an Indigenous look to that as well. So yeah, maybe we are utilizing tractors, but we're also making sure to be culturally competent when we're doing that. And many of our people still have traditional ecological knowledge of how to do various things. So we're using our TEK and our knowledge and traditional knowledge to exist and continue to persevere. Here's one of our staffers. This is Selena Hall. She was originally hired as our agronomist. She graduated on Sunday and drove all night long, and showed up for work Monday morning as our agronomist, and then quickly transitioned into our research and education division manager. So she's doing a lot of work to bring agriculture to the people and really develop and expand our departments. Right here, we're in a cornfield in Madison, and those were 4 different types of corn. None of those are a Ho-Chunk corn, and I believe those particular ones aren't even indigenous varieties of corn. But in this particular field, we were in a research field. There were probably a couple of thousand different varieties of corn from all around the world, new and old varieties. So it was really cool. Some of those corn varieties might have been growing as tall as your hip. The whole plant was hip high. And there were other ones that were taller than 2 men. We had a couple of guys in the field that day with us, and they were 6 feet tall, bigger than 6 feet tall. And the corn was at least twice as big as them. So it's really interesting, all the different varieties of plants that are out there. But again, today we have our Department of Agriculture Establishment Act. And out of this Establishment Act, I've highlighted a few words that I think we use this Establishment Act to guide what we're doing. And these 3 words are the words that stick out for me. And that was, healthy, talking about the health of the people and the environment, traditional, and reassertion. So that to me says that we need to focus on health, tradition, and sovereignty. We have 6 staff people right now. We're at our maximum staff. We have 6 people. Maximum in terms of our budget. In our budget, we're at capacity with 6 people. We certainly do need more than that if we want to be at capacity for what we need to do. We could easily use 10 or 20 people or even more than that. But our budget-wise right now, we're at max, and we are putting in for more positions in the new budget cycle. But right now we have the Ag Division Manager, the Research and Education Division Manager, the Food Sovereignty Specialist, Agronomist, Community Education Specialist, and then myself, the Executive Director. The nation has about 1,800 acres of agricultural land, and that doesn't mean 1,800 acres of land, of ag land specifically. It's the way that was measured is by leasing. So we used to do farmer leases, and we've had at a maximum 1,800 acres that were leased out to various farmers. But that doesn't mean that's the maximum number of acres. We can certainly be egging more than that. But what does that mean? We have other lands that might be wooded acreage, and agricultural activity can still be happening. Tapping maple trees, tapping box elder, tapping walnut, tapping these other trees, trapping or other types of activity can be happening within these lands. So we have more than 1,800 acres of agable land if we use agriculture in a broader tense. These 1,800 acres are spread over, specifically these particular 1,800 acres were spread over Jackson County, Sauk, Rock, Shawano, Wood, Juneau, Richland, and La Crosse counties. Now, the property that was in Vernon County, that is the KVR area, and the acreage that was there for agriculture, we actually turned that over to the DNR. It's beautiful, beautiful soil, beautiful. There was organic farming that was happening there. There was a beautiful location for organic agriculture to happen, but agriculture in terms of farming it in a more conventional sense, modern sense, wasn't great for the land because there was a lot of sloping and creeks there. There was erosion and runoff. So we actually turned that acreage over to the DNR, Wažookį DNR, so that they could do prairie land restoration there, which is a better use. It's better for the environment that way than to continue farming it that in a way that will cause erosion. The land in Richland County, that is where our Muscadet ranch is at. There's a number of several hundred acres, a couple hundred acres of land that was in agriculture there. That property is under the purview of heritage preservation or cultural resources. And that used to be where we used to have the Buffalo Ranch, which that closed down a good number of years ago. Right now, we're focusing on soft infrastructure and getting that soft infrastructure in place so that we can do more food production. So what does that mean? That means we need specific types of tools or equipment to do things like winnowing. If we want a winnowing machine to clean our corn or clean our dried beans, to do it in a faster way that we can have more food products available. We need some of the soft infrastructure in place. We're also working on hard infrastructure, and that is talking more about brick and mortar. We don't actually have a place to process our food. So when I'm asked, you know, are you going to have more foods available? We can't do that in a responsible way that's good for the environment and that doesn't create a lot of waste if we don't have this infrastructure to take our food to get it cleaned, processed, packaged, and shipped out. So we are working on getting that hard infrastructure in place. Now, that will take a couple of years, you know, going after the funding sources and then building and planning and all of that. So just know we are working really hard behind the scenes on that. And we're also going after grant funding, particularly for the infrastructure, but also for other things. And we do have some grant sources already. We are focusing on, as a department, food production, food development, and then creating value-added product. Now, for food production, we've been doing and will continue to our vegetables. We did a number of vegetables, herbs, and root vegetables last year, more as a pilot. We ended up giving those away to the community via the TOB building. House of Wellness, Health Department played a good role in getting that out to the people. And we did some herbs. So this year we'll be expanding that. Last year was a pilot. That was our first grow season where I guess the second grow season as a department, but the first grow season where we really had a nice grow plan. And when I say it was a pilot project, it was more like working out the kinks. Like, do we have the right soil amendments in place? Do we have the right practices for weed reduction and pest management? And so this year, you know, we've got a lot of practice between the different staff and what's going on in the soil to expand our production this year. Last year, we also did sunflowers. We did 10 acres of sunflowers. And so that's where, when we talk about product development, we've actually done a cold pressing. So let me see if I can say that actually what it is. It's a test cold press of the sunflowers. So we planted the 10 acres of high oil content sunflowers last season, and then harvested a bunch of that by hand and took that into another entity because we don't have the infrastructure. Remember, we don't have that hard infrastructure. So we're utilizing outside resources to help us with that. And so we're ready to pick up, I think it's 5 gallons of sunflower oil. And I don't remember how many pounds, but they also did a test run of grinding and milling the byproducts. So the remainder of the sunflower seed, they can mill that into protein powders that can be used for baking or other items. So that's what I'm talking about when I say product development. And when we're talking about value-added product, we're also working with some of our indigenous corns that we've got harvested in storage to create, to turn that into hominy, and that's called a value-added product. We did grains more as a pilot last year as some cover cropping, but we didn't harvest those. We used them more as a cover crop trial to address weed pressure or attract pollinators, things like that. This year we'll be expanding our grains program for the next grow season. And then we're also working on strategic planning for the future. Just know that your tribe, your Department of Agriculture, your tribe via your Department of Agriculture sits on 2 boards. So the Great Lakes Intertribal Food Coalition, or GLFC, and it's this organization that has a heavy hand in the Tribal Elder Food Box program. So once a month, we get those beautiful boxes out to our elders via the Health Department and TAU that might have culturally significant food in there, or familiar foods in there, and foods that are grown and produced by tribal producers or small producers that are local. That might be maple syrup, maple sugar. The Potawatomi tribe, I think they did 100% of the lettuces that were going into the box, wild rice, corn, hominy, zucchini, squash, any number of things were in that box. And that actually developed out of, if you remember during the COVID time, when food shortages were happening and food processing facilities were shutting down. If you remember the food box giveaways that were happening, and we were out slinging boxes every Friday out here at at District 1 Community Center, we'd have a big line of vehicles, probably a mile, half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, maybe a mile long, of vehicles waiting in line to get these food boxes. If you recall, those food boxes had, 2, 4, 6, 8 gallons of milk, a gallon or 2 gallons of yogurt, cheeses, and foods that a lot of our tribal population, weren't able to consume because they weren't able to digest that type of food readily. Some of the foods might not have just been culturally familiar, or they were culturally insignificant foods for our people. Maybe our people weren't using celery. I don't even know how you say that, or turnips. So they might have been unfamiliar foods. And so what happened was there were a couple of tribes up north that said, we really need to take this and create a culturally important, a culturally relevant food box for our elders. And so that's what they did. And it was a direct response to the food boxes that were going out across the country. And certainly we were appreciative of those food boxes, but at the same time, realizing that many people weren't able to consume them fully or benefit from that because they just couldn't use the items. So the Great Lakes Intertribal Food Coalition, we meet probably like twice a week to talk about different things in person. Right now, if you go to the Great Lakes Intertribal Food Coalition website, there's actually, if you go under the resources tab, there are grants that are available. One just closed on Friday, and then Monday, another one just opened up. If you're a tribal producer, or if you're a person who wants to become a tribal producer, those funds could be utilized to get started or to expand your operation. And I think the funding might be $10,000 or $20,000. It depends on which round. So please check that out if you're interested. Also, we are part of the Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advocacy Council, or WITCAC. Through this program, we had an intern 2 years ago, and that was Selena Hall. She was an intern. It was funded through WITCAC, and she was housed at NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Group out of Jackson County. She was housed there half the time, and then at Wažookį half the time, and that actually affected the trajectory of the rest of her college and deciding on what she wanted to do with the remainder of her college time and her post-college career was that internship. And we're very fortunate to have her. She ended up coming and working for the tribe after that. Also, we were just awarded funding for one agricultural apprentice through the WITCAC program. So we're waiting for that contract to go through. And then in the spring, hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll be able to recruit for that position. So both of these organizations offered a lot of different resources. The Department of Agriculture also has relationships with the University of Madison in particular. And Madison has different funding sources that the Ho-Chunk Nation benefits from significantly. And one of those is through the Rural Partnership Initiative funding. So not only does Madison have that funding that directly benefits the Ho-Chunk Nation, but then also I sit on the advisory board for the president on that as well. So we're kind of interfacing with RPI in 2 different ways at 2 different levels. This group has a few initiatives that they're working on in Wisconsin Indian country. And one of them is a maple syrup initiative, a wild rice initiative. And then the third one is cropping systems and food production. So that's the one I'm more involved in. There's also research forward funding through the university, and they've been a huge source of information to us at the nation. They'll send their staff out into the field, look at our stuff. They actually were the ones who purchased our vegetable starters last year and seeds last year. And then there's the SASCAP group that we're also a part of, and we've been elevated to the leadership team on here. And this is about, I think, a 10-year grant program through the university. And Wažookį Nation and Menominee are on the leadership team with the university on that one. And then there's sub-teams, of which I'm part of the data sovereignty team, the integrated crop and livestock team that I'm heavily involved in. And then out of this group, there's 5 grad students that they hired to be part of this team. And then as part of their grad work, they'll be doing something with the different tribes that the tribes benefit from, and then the grad student utilizes in their project that they need to do as well. So we have so one of the grad students, he's an agro-engineering student, and he's been assigned to Wažookį Nation, and he'll be working with us. This website here just kind of talks a little bit more about the SASCAP program. Right now, our department is funded through our tribal MPD dollars, of course, mostly, but then we also have additional funding through the NRCS EQUIP program, which NRCS is an offshoot of the USDA. And that program is going to be reimbursing us for the cost of 3 high tunnels. These high tunnels are basically, a high tunnel just means a greenhouse. So ours are 30 feet wide by 96 feet long. So they're pretty big. And they have 8-foot sidewalls and then the arch that goes up. So they're very tall. And we'll be building these this spring at Whirling Thunder. And those will be funded by NRCS. We also were awarded a specialty crop block grant to focus more heavily on vegetable production and helping train community members in becoming very proficient or expanding their abilities with vegetable production. And then we have our fourth funding source, which is EPA funding through Windrock International, and that was a sub-award, and we're using that for a farmer training program that will be operating a couple of cohorts and putting them through the training program, which we're just calling Building Capacity and Empowering Community. So this here was the beginning of our growth season last May at Whirling Thunder, and these are all volunteers that came out from the tribal community and Madison, and just did a lot of work to get this field planted. This field, where you can see it's brown and tilled up, that's about an acre. And so we had a lot of pollinator cover crops in there, several other, probably 10 other cover crops in there, a Ho-Chunk variety of Indian corn in there, and then a lot of vegetables and root vegetables and herbs. This here is the Sauk County site next to the Powell grounds. And you can see those black tube lines in there. That's our drip irrigation system. We had drip irrigation installed at both sites. And this tank was the tank in Sauk County. We would have to take it to go get it filled over at the casino, I think it was, and then come back and we could operate that to irrigate this little area. But in both vegetable production areas were about 1/3 of an acre for the vegetables and squash specifically. This here is in Sauk County. This is an indigenous variety of corn, not a Ho-Chunk variety. And it was 12 acres of corn that was planted out there. And that was made available to the tribal members last fall to go and harvest. And you can see, because we're not utilizing conventional farming practices, we're using regenerative farming practices. So we're not utilizing chemicals, we're not putting in pesticides. And so because of that, you'll see some weed pressure in there. And this is what it was looking like last fall. Also in Sauk County, so the vegetable site was off to the left, that cornfield was off to the right. We had 10 or 15, I think it was about 15 different cover crops in here, cover cropping strips to do different things. And this particular cover crop here was a pollinator mix to draw in the animals that we wanted to help with pollination. Some of the cover crops were actually intended to snuff out weeds. So if there's a weed pressure problem, you know, some of these cover crops can grow so proficiently and densely that it can actually, you know, drown out other pest plants. This here is also in Sauk County, another field on the other side of the tree line. You've got that tree line there. On the other side of that is this field here. And if you look really closely, there's sunflowers in this field. They're really small, but eventually they did grow into this. And we didn't utilize chemicals on these fields either, so you'll see those pressure, the pressure happening. But because we were using regenerative and organic practices, you'll see that here there's weeds within the corn, but in between those rows, we went in with a cultivator to help lessen the impact of those weeds. But nonetheless, you'll see that, you know, things are happening out here. So this was 10 acres of that high oil content seed directly across from the casino there. Some elders playing in the field. And there's a lot of work to managing these fields, a lot of weeding and trimming and trellising and harvesting that happens in these fields, and it requires a lot of work. And unfortunately, you know, we didn't have enough staff to handle the weeds. So some of our growing areas did get overrun with weeds. We didn't want to put plastic in the field or, you know, certain things in the field, but this year we're just going to have to concede. And we are researching different types of landscaping fabric that we can put into the field that maybe is PFAS free or reusable, so that we can actually have a good handle on the weeding. We won't have to weed because we'll be able to suppress it. This was some of the harvest. Not a great picture. I don't know what happened to the pixelation here, but you know, this is what our harvest would look like every week. We had volunteers coming out. So one week, my daughter came out there on the left, and they were they would harvest and then they would clean everything up so that it was nice and clean for consumption. So maybe if things were on the ground, if you're at home in your home garden, you might want to pick up that food off the ground and go ahead and eat it, rinse it off and eat it. That's fine. But when we're working at this scale, you know, if we're going to be selling into different food programs or something, there's different criteria that we have to comply with. And so that's what they're doing here, is making sure everything is up to snuff. This here is actually a Wažookį variety of corn, blue speckled or white. I think it's called white speckled. You can see it's blue and white. This is a Wažookį variety of corn, and one of our partners in Madison actually grew this out for us this year. It's beautiful. It's actually this one here. Amazing. This is another Wažookį variety of corn that another person had grown out for us, and this is blue. I think this one's called blue spotted corn. So you can see this one's got more blue, this one's got a little bit more white. And this here's our grad student, the gentleman on the right. He's a grad student at Madison, and he's the one working with our department on some of our capacity needs. And so the machine that he's holding on to on the right is a corn drying system, where you can actually pick the corn like this, you know, and then you just take off the husks and then put it into bags, and those bags go right into this machine, and then it air dries just like that. It's a pretty cool little thing. Here we have a farmer, this farmer in the right in the center there, showing us that machinery. Is a friend of the field, and he's just showing us different types of equipment that he's using. And we actually utilized him. He tilled up those fields for us in Sauk County. He is a conventional farmer, and he understands that, you know, we didn't want to utilize conventional practices. So when he tilled that up for us, because we didn't have the equipment to do it yet, He was actually able to take those blades there and turn them in a way, put them at an angle that would be more regenerative versus conventional. Here's our grad student here on the left with his advisor on the right. And this machine they're looking at is a custom build. They made a custom designed machine to do different types of planting in the field. This is another custom machine, row crimping, that we're looking at to figure out exactly what machines that our department would need. So coming up this year, we've got a food producer training coming up in April, and this will be taking place at District 1 Community Center. It's a multiple day training, and if anybody's interested in becoming a food producer and growing food, and then selling it, if they're selling it into stores, restaurants, schools, tribal elder food box, you're going to want to go to this training so that you understand all the parameters that surround food safety. And you'll see how it actually reduces things like E. coli outbreaks and things like that. Really important training. If you're interested in that, you can go ahead and reach out to me. We'll have a flyer coming out for that pretty soon. We've got a tractor safety training coming up in April. This will be down closer to the Madison area. We were going to do it on site, but we don't have all of the equipment that we want. And so we're going to go to another site where they have more of the tractors and more of the heavy machinery that we want to get onto and do a more intensive training. That'll be a one-day training. And this will be for like tribal ag departments and their staff or tribal producers. So if you're interested in something like this, let me know. It may or may not be available to you. It really depends. The food producer training is pretty wide open though. We'll be having some soil training coming up, and that will be teaching how to test your soil. It's really easy. We don't have a date for that yet, but stay tuned. And then the high tunnels that I talked about, the 3 high tunnels that we've got, we'll be getting those put up over the period of April. We're doing a more public event, educational training event, the week of April 14th, Monday through Thursday. Friday is Good Friday, so we're not going to do it on Friday, but we're probably going to be spreading it out over multiple weeks because it is such a big undertaking, and it's going to require a lot of volunteers. We're looking for volunteers for this one. So stay tuned for that. We'll be having a flyer coming out for that. But we'll be doing post pounding and putting in sidewalls, erecting the arches, doing plastic, pulling plastic over the top, and then applying end caps. And then the Tribal Elder Food Box Program, we're going to try to put food into that program this year from the Ho-Chunk Nation, and we're going to start with radishes and hominy. But this is where, you know, if you're a producer, we can work together on this, or you can just work directly with GLIFC on that, or what have you. But we're always looking for more tribal producers here, or small producers, emerging producers, organic producers, BIPOC producers. Last year, and we're going to do it again this year, we had volunteer days at Sauk County and Whirling Thunder. So these are just community engagement activities. We really want to encourage people to get out into the field and learn from us, or share your knowledge with us. And we actually brought in different activities as well as part of these volunteer days. So we had like, they call them insect ambassadors, and it was a group of grad students and organization out of UW-Madison that came in and did some activities, and it was really informational. So we can do a lot of different things, but these volunteer days will be happening once or twice a week, and we're going to probably be looking for more volunteers this year. We're offering a CSA. We're going to do 30 shares. The CSA is a community supported agriculture program, and the way that has been operating within the nation is, as tribal members, you're able to go to the health department and enroll in their program to either utilize health department funding to purchase or reimburse you and your family for what do they call it? Like fitness club memberships, or you can utilize the funding to purchase a vegetable box or a community supported ag box or a CSA. And then by doing that, it's basically a vegetable subscription box, and you're getting a box of vegetables every week. And then what's in that box is dependent upon what's being harvested, what's in season at that time. And each farm kind of has their own variations of that. And I think that costs a family like $20 or $30, and then you get about 8 or 10 or 12 weeks worth of that vegetable subscription. So we're doing that this year as a pilot project. We're only offering 30 shares in the Black River and Toma area, which we're also offering half shares. So that 30 shares might actually come out to be about 40 boxes. And then I mentioned the apprentice funding that we have. We'll be offering one apprenticeship position. And then we actually have the other funding that I had talked about, the EPA funding, to do a farmer or agriculturalist training program. And we'll do cohorts of that. So that will be coming up this year as well. And then I'll just leave you with this final thought of food sovereignty and what it is. And I'll just leave that here and turn it over for questions to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Hinu, for your presentation today. We will open it up to any questions. I saw that there was one, or a couple actually, from Henrietta Funmaker. So is that similar to Serve Safe certificate?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The question was, is that similar to Serve Safe certificate? I can assist with TAU if you need volunteers. Oh, and then she said, oh, you just said that. What was that?
I'm guessing the Serve Safe, that's probably more for like restaurant workers, and so it'll be a little bit different. It'll be focused on harvesting and transporting and storing food.
And Henrietta's other question was, why are the sunflowers not following the sun?
There were like a whole field along by Ho-Chunk Gaming down in Dells. And I noticed where the sun was, but they weren't pointed towards the sun. I was just curious, and I also seen it on Facebook too, so I don't know why.
I don't know either.
The sun. Yeah, I thought that was really weird. Okay.
I don't know.
Any other questions? Does anybody want to put in the chat, or does anyone want to come off of mute and ask Hinu any other questions?
Are you accepting any volunteers? Or like I know we have corn harvesting sometimes, and then like we dry corn and stuff, but I was just curious if you guys do that yet, or harvest the corn yourself.
So what we did with the corn specifically, because remember, we don't have a lot of workers, and we have, you know, property all over the state to manage, which we have to get to that too. So with the corn, what we did was we just grew it and made it available to the tribal public for them to harvest and then do what they want with it. We do have some that we harvested last year that is in dried, it's in storage. And that is what we're looking at turning into hominy. And then our goal is to get that into the tribal elder food box if possible. But we are looking for volunteers. Like we have the volunteer days. We're going to need a lot of volunteers this year, you know, with what's happening out in the world, you know, and a lot of concern about food prices and food security. You know, we're looking at trying to expand. We're going to grow more than what we can actually take care of, because we know that that's going to be a need. And with that, we are absolutely 100% going to need volunteers, because we're going to plant beyond our capacity. And so we absolutely are going to need people to come out and help with the weeding of that, the maintenance of that, because we're just not going to be able to do it all ourselves. We have to focus on other things within the department to hit the department requirements that we have to do. So for volunteers, yeah, we're going to need volunteers. And then some of what we're harvesting for our CSAs, we have to overplant for the CSA to account for bunnies or turkeys or deer. And so we're going to have, you know, likely extra produce. And so we'll be looking at trying to get those into some of the different programs within the tribe. But yeah, we'll need help.
There's another question. Where's a good place to get started if we have no experience with agriculture? I want to get involved, but don't know where to start.
So look for our community events and our volunteer days. Some of the volunteer days might be, hey, just come and help us weed. Other volunteer days, we're bringing in guest speakers or different techniques that we're teaching. But there's always somebody there talking about something, even if it just looks like we're weeding today, we're still doing different things like, hey, this actually isn't a weed. This here is bringing in pollinators, or we're trellising, or we're harvesting. So that's a good way, is just to get involved with our community events and volunteer days. But also, when I mentioned the farmer/agriculturalist cohort program, that's where we're looking to do very intentional training. So we want you to come in, you know, sign up, enroll, and it might be classroom style or classroom / in the field hands-on work where we're teaching you about soil health, plant health, pest management, weed control, things like that. So we stay tuned. We don't have our dates set on that, but we'll be doing a very intentional training for those that are interested in becoming active and growing. But also we want to support those who want to become producers, right? So you want to grow at a scale that's larger than just for you and your family. You want to grow at a scale so that maybe you can sell some of your produce into the school system or the tribal elder food box or a food distribution program. So we want to be able to serve various capacities among that spectrum. And actually, you know what, you can follow our ag department. You can follow us on Facebook. We're not on any other social media, but Ho-Chunk Agriculture. And that's where we'll be advertising our volunteer days and community events, along with our tribal-wide email system.
Because I know that some people do have their gardens on their homesteads, so like tobacco. And I just wanted to know if there's like a community bulletin board where, like, if people needed volunteers as well to help harvest. I just figured I'd ask if there was a bulletin board that kind of groups it all together.
Yeah, we don't have that. And I don't know that we would have time to moderate something like that yet. Again, we'll be asking for more positions in the new cycle. And as far as like individual gardens, we're not able to go into individual gardens and offer assistance, just because, I mean, we actually got calls from, you know, Milwaukee to Green Bay to Wittenberg. Hey, can you do some tilling for me? And it's like, we can't drive 4 hours one way and 3 hours another way with 6 people. We don't even have enough people on board to do what we need to do. So we're not able to do that, but just know that we are pivoting, and we're trying to pivot with what's happening out in the world, right? And so we're not looking at doing community gardens per se, but we are looking at ways that we can assist with the community with what seems to be happening out in the world. So maybe we'll do some increased community events in the communities to be able to get some resources out to the community so that they can grow in their yard or areas. So again, follow us on Facebook for more on that when that comes up.
Thank you again, Hinu. I did put Renelle and I's emails in the group chat just in case anybody wants to email questions, and we can get those over to Hinu and we can share those with the group. But we will end with a closing today, and just a thank you everyone for joining. And thank you, Hinu, especially for sharing all of your wonderful information about the Department of Agriculture and all the things that you guys have been doing for the last 1.5 years. As a reminder, this session has been recorded today and will be available on the Department of Health website page and our Facebook page. We look forward to seeing you guys next session, which will be next Wednesday, February 12th, with Jennifer Baird to talk about seasonal depression. We welcome all feedback related to this session and series, and if you have a topic that you would like to learn more about, or if you would like to present on a topic, please reach out to Renelle and I, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Have a good Wednesday, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Sure appreciate it.